Okay, are we ready?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
yep.
Great. Okay, I'll stop sharing then. And I would like us to start from the first question. How does leadership accelerate innovation? Would you like to go first, Ed?
Yeah, I take a particular view of this based on the work that I've been doing over the last few decades, and that's the notion that that in a knowledge economy, conversation matters. And so for us to accelerate innovation, we need to build new disciplines of conversation, new conversations, new disciplines of conversation that combine collective thinking with doing. And this is a discipline. It's a discipline that leaders can lead, but it leads to experimentation. Oftentimes, to accelerate innovation, leaders need to create platforms, safe spaces within their organization where these conversations can happen. Because the current, we saw the fear and bureaucracy are two major problems. So creating a separate space. And then finally, the idea of embedding a discipline of double loop learning, which is, with these think do cycles, evaluating, spending some time, not too much, but, half an hour, 45 minutes every 7 days, 24 days, or 21 days rather, whatever, developing a discipline of what did we learn and what are we going to do next. And so this double loop learning that's really critical, and one of the things that too many organizations just leave by the wayside.
Great. Yeah, that's very, very interesting. What's Sophie? What's your view on this?
I totally agree with everything that Ed said there as well, and quite a few of the things I'd sort of written down similar points. I think this point is very much linked to the last point. What can make leaders more innovative? I think, starting with the first one, I think that people are naturally curious, and so if you can create a culture or create the conditions that captures that and values that, then you can grow that into kind of accelerating innovation. I think that there's something also about leaders asking with their with their teams fundamental questions about purpose, which I suppose links to what Ed was saying about this kind of the kind of evaluation and the review of what's going well. But I think sometimes we can focus on that review being about the kind of process that we've gone through rather than the outcome and the purpose of what we're trying to achieve. So if you take, I don't know, say our healthcare system in the UK, we would review its effectiveness on the basis of whether we've met waiting time targets and those sorts of things. But that's not the purpose really of a healthcare system. A healthcare system's purpose is to keep people well and stop them becoming ill in the first place, and so on. So I think when you start opening opportunities to have that dialogue around, what is our purpose here, and instead of just blindly following a system, which we've perhaps been stuck in for a long time, going back to that question about purpose, that's when I think you can start having some around, or prompting people and organisations and teams to come up with new and better ideas to get to that purpose that there are, those set of outcomes that they're trying to achieve. And then again, much like Ed, engaging, I often talk about engaging with unusual suspects, because you don't know what you don't know. You know about the things within your sphere of, influence or expertise. And, I often talk about if there was one thing that could really sort of drive innovation, I talk about this within the context of our legislation in Wales, achieving our 7 national wellbeing goals, it would be mass job swap across the public, private and voluntary sector. So you have, the healthcare professionals working in the police service, and you have the environmental experts working in the schools, and you that sort of, shared sort of ecosystem of different ideas and exposing people to different ideas, which in the normal course of their siloed working life, often they would come across. That's the sort of stuff that I think triggers innovation too.
That would be a brilliant, Sophie, that would be a brilliant idea for a simulation game, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
That would be a really good simulation game, role-playing game, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's brilliant, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. So going back to what you, Sophie, said about purpose, I think you mentioned the example you mentioned there tends to be more of a, so what you think that is a purpose is actually a KPI or a measure, if you like. So we tend to, there is that deep debate a lot, especially nowadays. I was reading an article the other day on HBR, I believe, and it was saying that, once a KPI becomes a measure, it stops being like, it really hinders innovation. What's your both Ed and Sophie, what's your view on that? And what's your advice, maybe the more practical one?
Well, I think innovation, if you think about an S curve, innovation comes at the early stages of an S curve where you're really doing what entrepreneurial thinking, recombining assets that you currently have embedded in your networks, recombinant innovation. And KPIs have an application higher up on the S curve when you're starting to think, okay, well, we've got a solution. How do we scale this? And so imposing KPIs on an innovation process is a little bit like putting a statue of Buddha on a television. I mean, these two things don't go together, and so for me, it's really, I think we talk about outcomes in our work, because we talk about the different dimensions of outcomes. We don't talk about goals, we talk about outcomes. What is the future we want to design together? Which goes back to Sophie's question, which I think is really excellent, which is understanding the purpose. And a leader can spark that conversation by asking a propelling question that moves us to a future that we can't quite see yet. It creates a new system out of the assets we currently have access to, because our current system is not delivering the results that we want. It's suboptimal. It's, it leaves too many people behind, whatever the problem is. And so the question then becomes for leaders, how do we design new systems? How do we design something better that gives us better results? And that's why I think Sophie's question about purpose is so fundamental to this. I mean, I think that's really, in strategic doing, we talk about it as the framing question. This is the question that frames the future and gets people looking toward that future. So, and so imposing a KPI onto that process, again, these two things don't go together for me. I mean, not to say that you can't measure the productivity of an innovation process. We can do that, but that's more along the process of deeper relationships and higher velocity and volume of flow of information across a network, which is not easily captured by a single KPI.
That's great. Thanks. Thank you, Ed. Yeah, Sophie, go on. Sorry to interrupt you.
I'm obviously in the right place because I'm agreeing with everything. I think we're going to get on really well.
Good.
So I want to sort of, I suppose, build on the points that I was making earlier, and then some of the things that Ed was saying there. So again, totally agree that a KPI, and I love that, I'm going to pinch that, it's like putting a Buddha on top of a TV, that KPIs at the beginning of that sort of process just mess the whole thing up, really. And often we're not actually measuring what matters at all. We're just measuring stuff that can be measured. So here I want to sort of build back to that point that I was making about the unusual suspects. In order to get measures which are, which are sensible and actually mean something in terms of outcomes, I think there's two really important things that we should be doing, which we don't we don't often do. So one is to involve, different players outside, so your unusual suspects, because if if I gave a scenario of, a bit of sort of futures thinking here, if your sole purpose is to decarbonize the transportation system, then investing all your money in electric vehicles is probably quite a sensible solution. However, if your purpose is wider, as it should be, so we want a healthy nation, we want to address socioeconomic disadvantage, we want to decarbonise our transport system, we want more cohesive communities, actually the EV investment is a really bad one, because that takes us back to all sitting in our electric vehicles rather than our diesel vehicles in congestion, not talking to each other and getting fatter and fatter. So what we want is, we want that sort of sense of what are the kind of collective broader outcomes that we're trying to achieve. And I think you can do that at any level. You can do that on a kind of macro kind of, governmental, political, strategy or, program for government, or you can do that in your, your department. Okay, this is what our department is all about, but what's the knock-on consequences of what we do in terms of the rest of the organisation, and so on. And then the other point that I would make, depending on, what sort of area you're working in, but the importance of involving the end recipient of that innovation, if you like, and I think back to, so my job before this was in policing. I was a deputy police commissioner in one of our police forces, and my area was domestic abuse and violence against women. That was one of my big portfolios, and we were measuring our effectiveness there by whether our cops had turned up and filled in a risk assessment form. Now then, and when you start digging into that, 88% of risk assessment forms that were filled in when they were called to a domestic violence incident resulted in no further action by anyone about, in relation to that victim. So if we ask that victim, are you now safer? The answer is no. We weren't asking the victim, are you now safer or do you feel safer? We were asking them, have you filled in the form? So, but when you start, so it connects back to that point on purpose. When you start involving the end, recipient of, whatever it is that you're doing, I think that, one, that puts, a completely different, or helps to re-prompt the conversation about purpose. And two, I think it really helps us to think about, are our KPIs helping anyone at all? Or are they just pointless tick boxing exercise, often to cover our own backsides rather than to actually achieve any good?
Yeah. In our work, we try to get participants. We think that the idea of a single vision doesn't make any sense, but we think the idea of engaging diverse audiences in the process of visualization is really important, which is, what is the future we want to see? What will people be thinking, doing, feeling together? Can you describe that with enough specificity that I can communicate that to you? And we talk about measurable outcomes, saying if you can describe it to me in a way that I can start to see it in concrete terms, then I can start to see your visualization. And we can actually put these things together. And that's a visualization exercise, not a visioning exercise, a visualization exercise that enables us to start designing, moving toward that North Star of designing that future that we see together. And that has nothing to do with KPIs.
Yeah, no, that's, I couldn't agree more, actually. And that's great, very nicely put. Great. So I have one more follow-up question based on what you two said on that first question. And it is about, oh, first of all, sorry, Natalia, hello, sorry. Are you going to participate in the conversation?
I'm just checking in. If you're okay, if you need something, just let me know. I'm just going around the rooms.
Yeah, I guess so, but I just...
Yeah, if you need anything, you can just let me know. I'm just going around. I'm leaving soon.
Okay, no, that's absolutely fine. I didn't want to check whether you're joining in. Okay, great, thank you very much. So yeah, what I was saying, yeah, so I have another question based on what you just said. So Sophie, you mentioned an ecosystem, like a broader ecosystem where you should involve the unusual suspects, as you called them. And you, Ed, mentioned, talked about conversation and, getting people to talk about innovation practically, and that needs to be, separate to, am I correct? That needs to be a separate space, and it needs to talk about new disciplines that combine collective thinking with doing. This is what it needs to focus. So, go on.
So, we've been working with Fraunhofer for a number of years to try to think about how do you design a new university. And this has application for a lot of bureaucratic organizations which are structured around hierarchy and command and control. They don't learn, they don't adapt. So how do you start to move organizations toward a more adaptive future without tripping off the immune system of the organization itself? Because people perceive these new innovations as a threat. That's one of the reasons why cultures of fear exist, right? So what we've learned is that one way to approach this is to think about a platform that kind of slides underneath the organization. It's created hopefully by top level support, but we've done it even without that. And you create this platform on which these deeper conversations can form. And out of those conversations, ecosystems form, relationships form, deeper conversations happen. People start sharing resources. This recombinant innovation process happens. And what strategic doing is, for the work that we've been doing, is essentially an operating system for that platform. A simple way to follow some simple rules to enable complex ecosystems to form. But it all relates to conversations, because conversation is the core technology of innovation. And it's through conversations that we create and share our knowledge. That if you don't understand that conversations that lead to complex collaborations actually have a structure to them, they have a discipline to them, they have a way in which you can design and guide them with questions, with propelling questions. It's not directing people, it's asking questions. And those are the new skills of leadership, I think, that we need to form. And oftentimes in bureaucratic organizations, so we're working with Stats New Zealand perhaps, and NIH in the US, both of those practitioners that we're working with are dealing with very heavy bureaucracies, very heavy protocols, KPIs, all of that stuff. And the only way that they're going to start to build this adaptive system is to create these safe spaces, these platforms, where conversations can happen over, we're not talking about a long time, 3 hours, where people can actually experience the power of connection. When they start to see, oh, wow, I can actually connect this person with that person, we can do this together. Now you're behaving your way into new ways of thinking, which is sort of the notion of positive deviance, the idea that you can actually behave your way into new ways of thinking. And so creating these spaces is really critically important. And if you don't do it this way, what we found is that you just trip off this immune system from the existing power structure that tries to kill it right off the bat. As I said, our colleagues in Fraunhofer and I have been working with, in universities, it's university politics is just brutal sometimes. And that's kind of what we've been trying to encourage universities to think about. How do you bring people together across departments and colleges to deal with these wicked problems without disrupting departmental budgets, college? We're not talking about different patterns of tenure and all that kind of stuff. what we're trying to do is create these horizontal connections that will, over time, they will overpower the hierarchy will shrink because it becomes less and less effective in creating value, creating the future that we want to see. A value in Mazzucato's idea, broad value, not just money value.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's great, and thank you for sharing that example with us. But my question was, going a step back, how do you identify these unusual suspects, or the stakeholders that you need to involve? How do you identify, and how do you get them aboard? How do you get them engaged? How do you get them engaged in these conversations, and they get they get them become part of the ecosystem?
Yeah, we actually talk about networks of the willing. We ask propelling questions, and we invite everybody to join, and whoever shows up are the people that we work with. So it's very much like an adoption cycle. You work with willing pragmatists, willing people to participate. As soon as you get into a stakeholder mentality of I've got to have a person from this organization and that organization, I think you're again kind of playing the wrong game.
Yeah, I use I suppose slightly different sort of terminology, but same point really. We talk about the frustrated champions that are kind of out there, who are existing in organisations but being utterly frustrated by some of the things that go on and so on. And then it's sort of, I think it's about finding your tribe of frustrated champions, whatever, or wherever they may be. But it's also about, I suppose, having a bit of a realization that if you're in an organization and you're a frustrated champion, that you're not going to be alone. There are going to be others out there, and you need to take it upon yourself to go and seek them out and start having conversations with them. I think that there is some really practical things that organizations can do to encourage that. So, organizing kind of networking events, having things like open house, collaborative working space. Like in my office we have an open door, so we have loads of random, anyone from the World Wildlife Federation to the Children's Commissioner to someone from government will often just pop in and kind of hot desk if they're in the area, and that generates kind of conversation. And one of the bizarre, not that this is a tiny thing, one of the most effective things that I've done to do that is I buy my not now because we're all working virtually, but we buy our team fruit every day from the local market, and we put it on. We've got a big massive table, and we've sussed out now also that people don't collaborate and discuss around the fruit unless it's cut up, but it's a worthy amount of time to spend cutting up the fruit, because people come and gather around that table, that whole the breaking of bread, and there's lots of analogies around that, and they start talking, they start collaborating, and then they'll find, that there's someone from government there who's hot desking, so they'll have a conversation with them. And it's those sorts of, you sort of think, oh God, a plate of fruit, what can a plate of fruit do? I tell you, it's one of my best spends, that plate of fruit from the market.
So I got two ideas that I'm going to take home. One is this whole idea of frustrated champions. I love that. I mean, that's great. And the other is the fruit desk. That's a brilliant idea. Both, but cutting it up. That's yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, great. I also noted these two ideas down. So yeah, well done. Yeah, really, really good ideas. Okay, so going on to the second question. I think we've covered it, but if you were to just pick 2 or 3 essential qualities of innovative leaders, what would these be? Sorry, what would these be? Sorry.
Sophie, do you want to go first? Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I think it's got to be, you've got to be willing to take risks. So you've got to be brave. I think you've got to be inclusive and permissive. And I think you've got to make sure that your team or whoever you are working with know that you've got their back, because people are more likely to take risks. And I think that if you find yourself, if you're lucky enough to find yourself in a leadership position, then you should always, you know, have the back of your team if they've taken, you know, risk for the right reason. So you've got to have that kind of, and you've got to, I suppose, quickly, you've got to accept that things are you're going to fail at some things. And you've got to see failure as a necessary part of doing better. And you have to embed that culture within your team. So no blame, have people's back, be inclusive and permissive, and yeah, that will lead you to take risks and innovate, I think.
Yeah, I agree totally with what Sophie just said. I think this whole idea of an experimentation mindset and using whatever we learn as learning, as opposed to failure. I mean, I think that's something that leadership can focus on, and that ties to the whole notion of curiosity and humility, which is, you know, we're dealing with complex systems that we don't totally understand. We can never figure them out completely, but we're curious about them, and we're willing to invest in experimentation to learn. And that does require a certain humility. And then I'll pass on what one of my mentors told me, which is persistence. I mean, if you truly believe what you're moving your team toward, I asked my mentor what guidance would he said, and he said, press on regardless. And so, you know, and I keep on, you know, the younger leaders that I now mentor, I tell them, you know, if you truly believe the future you're trying to design, then just keep going. Yeah.
So my version of that from policing world was proceed until apprehended or tasered.
Okay, good.
Okay. So now, what we've tried here in the preparation for this forum, we've tried to look at the essential qualities of a leader and the essential qualities of an innovator, and the reason is because although we at the Institute, we recognize that everyone is a leader. It doesn't matter the level, you know, of their position or the level, but when we're having conversations around leadership, it's a bit like they're innovation experts, but they're not they're not leadership experts. And yeah, they're leading innovation and they're great at it, but they don't know how to lead the team, you know, how to manage the team. So my question basically is, what do you think? Is that true? And then, you know, I have some more questions on that. Do you think that these, you know, the innovators and the leaders do they share characteristics?
Well, I'll take a crack at it. I think, to me, both innovation and leadership is a team dynamic. It's really a team dynamic because we're addressing complex challenges. Now, I'm talking about leadership that's really focused on adaptation and learning, as opposed to, you know, there is a leadership of a team where you've got a technical problem and you've got to solve the technical problem, you know, and that a single leader can address a team. But increasingly in our organizations, we're dealing with adaptive challenges or complex or wicked problems that there is no technical solution to that. And that is more along the lines of what Amy Edmondson talks about as teaming or extreme teaming, which is, it's a group process. It's a process And there may be a titular leader or a positional leader that in the group, but what we find in our work is that, again, leadership in both innovation and these team situations, adaptive situations, is all about the conversations that people are having, how you design and frame those conversations, and how you guide them to experimentation, how you guide them toward actually doing something, not just talking about things. And we've learned that these conversations are complex, and they involve, we've identified 10 skills, which we outline in the book, Strategic Doing. And that nobody, although you can do all 10 skills, nobody is equally good at all 10 skills. And there's reasons, cognitive reasons why that is. But what we learn is that we build a culture of group leadership or dynamic leadership in which leadership moves around as the task, as the thing that we have to really focus on, shifts. So I'll give you an example. In our strategic doing work, I'm very much of a connector. I think about, how do I connect to John? And I've known John for a long time, and how do I do that? But Liz on our team is all about, hey, Ed, that's a great idea. How do we build a system around this? How do we create a new system around this? And then Janice on our team is, yeah, but we also have to be able to create enough value to sustain ourselves. So she's at the top of the S curve. These women are at the accelerating part of the S curve. I'm down at the early stage of the S curve. And so understanding that in complex environments, leadership tasks shift as the team is evolving and experimenting. We're dealing right now with a big complex problem of how do we deploy strategic doing across Ecuador. The new president of Ecuador is coming in next week, and their minister has asked us, well, how could we deploy this across the whole country? And of course, I'm down there thinking, oh, well, that'd be a great idea. And Janice is sitting there with a sharp pencil saying, yeah, but how, you can't be in 3 places at once, Ed. You've got, and so you actually have to have people looking at this complex problem from different perspectives. And I have to respect Janice's leadership, and she has to respect mine. And so it's much more of a group phenomenon. It's much more of it's not a positional leader. It's a team leadership when we talk about a core team as being just that, the ability to do that. And we've worked with a company out of the Netherlands to actually work on where along the S curve are your gifts? Where are you particularly good? And so I've learned that I'm down here at the S curve, but I'm a trained lawyer, so I can operate at the top, but I'm just not great at it. I'm not happy up there. Don't make me do that. And so I try to stay where I'm really, where my gifts are, where I'm happiest. Janice, on the other hand, is a former CEO of a manufacturing enterprise. I mean, she's down there counting the beans and making sure that we make the thing work. You got to have both. So I don't think of leadership as a sole process. When you get out of the technical problem and you get into more adaptive, complex, wicked problems.
I think, I agree with the sort of different qualities as part of a team. We often use sort of color works or which is like a version of Myers-Briggs, and anyone in my team can tell you what the color is of any of their colleagues, and then we work in an agile way to try and plot the right sort of, or try and at least have one of each color in a team, and sometimes skew the team towards a particular color depending on what it is we're trying to achieve. But I also think that in terms of sort of, I suppose I was coming at this question slightly differently. You were talking about, how do innovators, how do they lead within a team? I was supposed thinking about it in terms of, how do they lead in a way which takes forward and embeds their approach to innovation. And I think they need to make friends with the power holders. I think sometimes innovators can be seen as the awkward squad, and you know, that's a real risk. That doesn't mean that, you know, if you've got a good leader leading an organization, they won't see them as the awkward squad. They'll see them as, you know, the ones that they absolutely sort of need on board. However, we know that there's lots of leaders out there who aren't very good leaders, and because, you know, if there wasn't, we wouldn't be in such a mess with climate change and a whole range of other things. But I think it's about kind of making friends with the power holders, or at the very least kind of pitching your ideas in a way which can be understood and is attractive to the power holders. And I think if you get that in, that's when you start to sort of make some, you know, make some traction, because without those power holders, you're going to be in a real kind of struggle to drive things forward. And then I think if you're going to be a successful innovator and a leader in innovation, you've got to be a good communicator for that, you know, for that reason. You've got to be able to talk to other people and understand what their issues are. So, you know, my last job seconded, you know, this bit about job swapping, seconded a load of health professionals into our police service. And, you know, because for years and years we've been at odds. You know, we're talking about offenders and they're talking about patients, and actually they're all one and the same thing. And when you start coming together and talking each other's language, you realize that actually you've all got pretty much the same problems, and if you come together you can sort of work them through. So there's definitely something about understanding or facilitating arenas where that sort of shared understanding can happen. And I suppose that links back to this, you know, the frustrated champions and find your tribe. Find your tribe of frustrated champions, because sometimes, and I would say this is probably one of the most successful things that we've done in Wales with our approach to the Future Generations Act, is not the fact that we've got a law. Of course, that's important, but it's that law that's prompted all of these frustrated champions to go, I'm mad and I'm not the awkward squad. I now have permission around this, and I may still be a bit of a lone frustrated champion in my organisation, but there are going to be others out there. And how do we all connect up, and how in that finding your tribe are you actually building a movement towards change? Because, you know, there's one thing that ultimately power holders, you know, old school power holders don't like. They don't like to be kind of completely left behind when the balance is sort of tipping towards new and better ways of doing things. So if you can build that movement, that is incredibly powerful in terms of, you know, shifting agendas.
I want to underscore what Sophie, one of the points that Sophie made, which I think is really critical. And that is, you know, when you're innovating, you're actually building a new narrative. And so the capacity to communicate that is really important. So
we're being chucked out.
Yeah.
Don't get to say goodbye before we before I have to shoot off, Ed. It's lovely to meet you, and I'd love to stay in touch.
Wonderful, Sophie. Yes, I'm a big admirer of your work beforehand, and I'm even more so now. So thank you very much, and I'll circle back.
Great stuff.
All right.
Probably be